Okay, let's think about this. What if the cold, quiet forests of the Baltics held one of Europe's oldest, most resilient, and frankly, most paradoxical genetic signatures?
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
It really is. So today, we're diving deep into Estonia's genetic story. It feels like a real scientific enigma, something that, challenges how we think about identity.
Absolutely. We're talking about this really unique mix, deep ancient DNA roots, these kind of unexpected Siberian traces, and this quiet strength you see shaped by centuries of, well, foreign rule and pressure.
It's a puzzle, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it might just redefine how you, our listeners, view history, language, and maybe even what national belonging means.
It definitely has that potential. Estonia's DNA, it's genuinely fascinated scientists for ages, not just because it's distinct, but because it forces us to question those sort of mainstream ideas about how genetics, language, and national identity, how they all link up, or sometimes how they don't.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack that very paradox. We'll be digging into the sources you shared, pulling out the key insights, looking at the powerful and, yeah, sometimes controversial reasons why Estonia's genetic makeup seems so different from anywhere else in Europe.
Makes sense.
Let's start at the beginning then. These ancient roots, deep in the Estonian land, what have scientists found?
Well, researchers from places like the Estonian Biocenter and big projects like the Genome of Estonia, they've uncovered some really striking data.
Like what specifically?
Okay, so for instance, a really significant chunk, we're talking over 35% of Estonian men carry a specific Y-DNA haplogroup. It's called N3 or sometimes N1C1.
And just quickly, a haplogroup.
Yeah.
It's like a genetic clan marker passed down the father's line, right?
Yeah.
Helps trace deep ancestry.
Exactly. It's a powerful clue for tracking ancient family histories, migrations, that sort of thing.
Okay, so this N3 marker, what's the story it tells about their deep past?
Well, it's like a living echo of these huge ancient migrations across Eurasia. You find this same N3 marker in Finns, in Northern Russians, even in Uralic-speaking groups way over in Siberia.
Wow, okay, so not just their immediate neighbors.
Not just them, no. It suggests this deep, interconnected history that kind of ignores modern borders. It puts Estonia right at this fascinating crossroads of ancient human movement.
And that's just the paternal line. What about the maternal side? Does that add another layer?
Oh, it absolutely does. And maybe an even more ancient one. Their mitochondrial DNA, that's the bit you only get from your mother, shows over 40% continuity stretching all the way back to Mesolithic hunter-gatherer.
40% from the Mesolithic. That's incredible.
It really is. We're talking about some of the oldest, most unbroken maternal lineages anywhere in Europe. This kind of genetic stability, holding on for that long, it's just incredibly rare when you think about Europe's history, all the mixing, invasions.
So just to connect the dots, Estonians have this higher than average genetic link to Siberian and Uralic peoples, more so than Latvia or Lithuania next door.
Yeah.
And somehow, this unique gene pool, it just stayed remarkably preserved, despite Vikings, Germans, Swedes, Russians, everyone coming through.
That's precisely the core of the mystery, yeah. Despite all these waves of foreign rule, different cultures coming in, the underlying population seems to have kept this distinct genetic core.
How? What allowed that? Resilience, isolation.
It probably speaks to a deep resilience, yes, and maybe periods of relative isolation geographically or culturally that allowed these ancient markers to just persist. But, this is where the ancient story takes a really interesting turn. It leads us to one of the biggest paradoxes.
Yeah, the language thing, the fact that their language doesn't seem to quite match the DNA picture.
Exactly that. Historians always emphasize, quite rightly, that Estonian is a Uralic language. It's in the same family as Finnish and Hungarian, which sets it apart from most European languages, which are overwhelmingly Indo-European.
Okay, so linguistically, they're grouped with Finns and Hungarians.
But genetically, they're actually closer to their Indo-European neighbors, the Balts, like Latvians and Lithuanians and even Slavs, than they are to, say, Hungarians.
Huh. So Uralic language, but genes that are more of a Baltic European blend with those Siberian traces mixed in. That is a mismatch. How do scientists explain that? Is there a consensus?
The main working theory, the one that seems to fit best, is a language shift that happened thousands of years ago.
A language shift, meaning?
Meaning a relatively small group, maybe bringing this Uralic language, managed to spread their tongue, perhaps because it had prestige or they had some advantage, but the actual population, the people already living there, didn't get replaced wholesale. They largely stayed put and adopted the new language over time.
So the language changed, but the genetic makeup of the population stayed broadly the same.
Pretty much. Like the language swept over the land, but the people underneath remained largely continuous. It's a fascinating idea because it fundamentally challenges how we often assume nations and ethnic groups form. The idea that language always spreads with massive movements of people. Here, it suggests culture and language can move more independently.
That really does change how you think about identity formation.
Mm.
But okay, this deep genetic history, it doesn't just stop in the ancient past, does it? It seems to cast a shadow on more recent times too, some quite sensitive areas.
It does, unfortunately. This unique genetic profile has intersected with some difficult historical moments. For instance, during the Soviet era, there are persistent rumors, and we should stress they are rumors that Estonia's genetic data was either suppressed or maybe even exploited.
Exploited how?
Well, the allegation is that Soviet scientists were collecting DNA, perhaps without full consent, for ethnic mapping projects. And this could have fed into those Cold War narratives about, Slavic versus Uralic differences, maybe even trying to establish some kind of superiority. It's a stark reminder of how science can get twisted by politics.
And that history must linger, even today, because now Estonia is actually, praised for its modern genetic work, the Estonian Biobank.
Exactly. It's seen as cutting edge. They've collected over 200,000 DNA samples. That's nearly 20% of the whole population. The stated goal is personalized healthcare, using genetic insights to tailor treatments. On the surface, it looks incredibly progressive.
But there are concerns.
There are. Critics raise serious privacy issues. In a small country like Estonia, could genomic data, even anonymized, be re-identified somehow? And then there's that deeper fear, perhaps echoing the past. Could this genetic research be misused? Could it start to define who counts as a real Estonian?
That's a very tricky slope.
It absolutely is, especially given the historical context. It could unfortunately fuel ethnic divisions or exclusion.
Which brings us right back to that fundamental question their story poses. Who are the true Estonians? You see this play out with discussions about ethnic minorities, right? Like the Sami, the Seto people down south, the Voro speakers.
Precisely. These groups might show slightly different genetic nuances, but they have incredibly strong cultural and historical ties to Estonia. They are Estonian in so many ways.
So it forces the question, should DNA be the deciding factor for belonging? Or is identity ultimately about culture, shared history, and choosing to belong?
Estonia's genetic journey really throws that tension into sharp relief in a very 21st century way.
Okay, moving beyond identity politics, though. Does the unique DNA tell us anything else? Have researchers looked into, say, physical traits, or even psychological ones? Keeping in mind, of course, that correlation isn't causation.
That's the crucial disclaimer always. No gene defines personality or complex traits, but researchers have observed some interesting potential associations.
Such as?
Well, for example, certain genes linked to cold resistance and how the body metabolizes fat seem to be more common in Estonians, which, makes intuitive sense. It likely reflects adaptations from surviving centuries of those really harsh, cold winters.
That seems logical given the environment shaping them for so long. Anything else intriguing?
There are some findings related to serotonin and dopamine variants. These are neurotransmitters involved in mood and behavior. Some variants observed more frequently in Estonians have, in other studies on different populations, been linked to traits like emotional restraint or introversion.
Interesting. Consistent with stereotypes, maybe?
Mhm.
The calm, private Estonian.
It's consistent with some cultural observations, yes. But again, we're talking about very subtle potential predispositions, not destiny. It's just another small piece, a subtle layer in this really multifaceted picture of Estonia's genetic and cultural profile. It's definitely not saying this gene makes you reserved.
Understood. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. When we synthesize everything, why is Estonia's genetic story so, well, special? It feels like it reflects a people who, against the odds, withstood centuries of occupation.
Managed to hold on to a rare ancient language family.
Without completely losing their distinct genetic signature.
And today, they hold one of the most ancient and one of the most medically advanced genomes in Europe. It's this incredible contrast. Their whole story really challenges how we define ethnicity, nationality, even resilience in the modern world.
So ultimately, the message is that the Estonian genome isn't just, cold data points on a screen. It's almost like a declaration, isn't it? A testament to a quiet, resilient identity.
Beautifully put. It really is. Which leaves us, and you listening, with some things to think about.
Yeah. What part of Estonia's genetics surprised you the most? And maybe does having a rare or distinct genetic profile make a nation somehow more special, or does it just make it more misunderstood?
Worth pondering.